She didn't want money, just a father. What the billionaire did will surprise you. He tried to move on with his life, but he couldn't forget the little girl with the teddy bear in her arms. He returned the next day, brought food, and little by little, he brought love too. What started as charity became the strongest bond in his life. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The clock showed 5:45 when Alexander Mitchell adjusted the cuff of his Italian shirt for the third time that afternoon. The cold June wind cut across the faces of pedestrians hurrying down Fifth Avenue, but he remained motionless in front of the mirror in the commercial building, waiting for his driver with the calculated patience of someone who had turned punctuality into a religion. At 42, Alexander had built an empire in the financial technology sector. His company, Mitchell Solutions, occupied 3 entire floors of that building and employed more than 500 people. Every decision he made moved millions of dollars. Every meeting redefined strategies that impacted hundreds of lives. He was a man accustomed to absolute control, where every variable was predicted, every outcome measured. His personal life followed the same rigorous pattern: minimalist apartment in Tribeca, meticulously organized schedule, relationships that lasted just long enough not to create inconvenient attachments. Alexander had learned early on that feelings were luxuries that successful men couldn't afford to cultivate. The phone vibrated in his suit pocket. A message from Karen, his assistant. "Mr. Mitchell, the driver is stuck in traffic on Broadway. He will arrive in 15 minutes. Alexander typed a dry response confirming receipt of the information and put the device away. 15 minutes of delay meant mentally reorganizing the evening's commitments. It was then that his gaze shifted to the other side of the street. Sitting on the sidewalk between a closed flower shop and a diner was a girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. The blue coat she wore was too thin for the cutting cold of that afternoon, and she held against her chest a teddy bear so worn that one could barely distinguish its original color. She wasn't begging or calling attention from passers-by. She was simply there, her eyes lost in the movement of people passing without seeing her. Alexander felt something strange move inside his chest, a restlessness he couldn't name. He tried to look away, to focus again on the stock market numbers he was checking on his phone, but his eyes kept returning to the girl. There was something in that scene that defied the cold logic with which he organized the world. Without thinking twice, he crossed the avenue. Traffic was heavy, but Alexander moved with the determination of someone accustomed to overcoming obstacles. He approached the girl slowly, as if afraid of startling her. "Hi," he said, crouching down to be at eye level with her. "Are you okay?" The girl looked at him with a seriousness that didn't match her age. There was no fear in her eyes, but a deep sadness that touched Alexander in an inexplicable way. "I am," she answered, pressing the teddy bear tighter against her chest. Alexander took his wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket and separated a $50 bill. "You must be hungry. How about buying something to eat?" The girl shook her head, politely refusing. "I don't want money." "You don't?" Alexander was genuinely surprised. In his world, everything was solved with money. "Then what do you want?" The answer came in a whisper that almost got lost in the traffic noise. "I want someone who loves me." The words hit Alexander like a punch to the stomach. He remained silent for long seconds, not knowing how to react. At his company, he had answers for everything. He knew exactly what to say in any business situation, how to reverse crises, how to motivate teams. But before this small girl, he felt completely lost. "What's your name?" he finally asked. "Emily. And where are your parents, Emily?" The girl lowered her eyes to the teddy bear. "Mom left. She said she'd come back, but it's been many days." Alexander felt a tightness in his chest. "And your father?" "I don't have a father. I never did." The silence that followed was filled only by the noise of traffic and the wind that made the dry leaves dance on the sidewalk. Alexander observed the girl more carefully. Despite her simple clothes and dirty face, there was a dignity in Emily that impressed him. She didn't cry, didn't complain. She simply existed in that moment with a courage that many adults didn't possess. "Are you sleeping here on the street?" Alexander asked. Emily nodded. "But Teddy protects me," she said, showing the teddy bear. "He was my mom's when she was little like me. Now he protects me too." Alexander looked around. The movement of people had decreased with the falling evening, and the cold was getting more intense. The idea of leaving a child that size alone on the street at night deeply bothered him. "Emily, you can't stay here, it's dangerous." "I have nowhere to go," she answered with the same simplicity as before. Alexander fell silent again. His rational mind told him to call Child Protective Services, to let the proper agencies handle the situation. But something stronger prevented him from simply walking away. Maybe it was the way Emily looked at him, without judgment, without expectations. Or maybe it was the silent courage that radiated from her, so different from everything he knew. His cell phone rang. It was the driver informing him that he had arrived. Alexander looked at the black car parked across the street, then at Emily. "Emily, would you like to have dinner in a warm place today?" The girl's eyes lit up for the first time. "Can I bring Teddy?" "Of course you can." Emily got up slowly, adjusting the teddy bear under her arm. Alexander noticed that she limped slightly on her left leg. "Are you hurt?" "It's from birth," Emily explained, giving no importance to the matter. "Mom used to say that everyone is born different in some way." Alexander extended his hand, and Emily held it without hesitation. Her hands were small and cold, but the confidence with which she grabbed his fingers moved him in a way he couldn't understand. They crossed the street together, Alexander automatically adapting his step to Emily's rhythm. The driver, a middle-aged man named Richard, opened the rear door of the sedan without asking questions. Alexander had always appreciated Richard's discretion. "Richard, change of plans. Let's stop at the supermarket before going home." During the journey, Emily remained silent, observing the city through the dark window of the car. Alexander observed her discreetly, trying to understand what he was doing. He had never been impulsive. Every decision in his life was carefully analyzed, weighed, calculated, but there he was, taking an unknown child home without having the slightest idea what to do next. At the supermarket, Emily followed him through the aisles with wide eyes. Alexander realized that she had never been in a place like that. He picked up fruits, bread, milk, ingredients for a simple soup. Emily didn't ask for anything, just observed everything with silent curiosity. "You can choose something you like," said Alexander, stopping in the cookie aisle. Emily timidly pointed to a package of cream-filled cookies with teddy bears on the packaging. "They're just like Teddy," she said, smiling for the first time. In the apartment, Alexander improvised a room for Emily in his office, arranging blankets on the leather sofa and bringing pillows from the guest room. While preparing a simple soup in the kitchen, he could hear her talking quietly with the teddy bear, telling about the good giant who had taken her to a warm castle. The description made him smile, despite the strangeness of the situation. Good giant. It had been years since someone had seen him that way. They dined in silence, Emily eating with the appetite of someone who hadn't been properly fed for days. Alexander observed her, still trying to mentally process the events of that late afternoon. In a few hours, his routine had been completely altered by a 6-year-old girl and a worn teddy bear. "Why did you help me?" Emily asked when she finished eating. Alexander hesitated. He didn't have a rational answer to give. "I guess because you needed it," he finally said. Emily nodded, as if that explanation made perfect sense. "Teddy said you have a good heart, even if you hide it very well." Alexander smiled despite himself. "Teddy is very wise." "Yes, he is. He always knows when people are truly good." Later, when Emily finally fell asleep on the improvised sofa, Alexander stayed awake in the living room, watching her sleep. She held the teddy bear tightly, even unconscious, as if afraid it would disappear during the night. For the first time in years, Alexander spent a night keeping vigil for someone. He couldn't stop thinking about the courage of that small girl, the way she had faced abandonment without losing hope, the confidence with which she had accepted his help. There was something about Emily that touched a part of himself that he had forgotten existed. During the night, Emily developed a fever. Alexander, who had never cared for a sick child, felt lost in the face of her tremors and red cheeks. He called the private medical service and, while waiting for the doctor to arrive, stayed by her side, passing a damp cloth on her hot forehead and murmuring words of comfort that he didn't know where they came from. For the first time in a long time, Alexander Mitchell felt truly useful. The doctor arrived at 4 in the morning. Dr. Henry was a discreet professional who had been attending Alexander's high-standard clientele for years, accustomed to being called at any hour without asking inconvenient questions. He examined Emily carefully, prescribed medications for the fever, and guided Alexander on basic care. "It's just a strong cold, Mr. Mitchell. With rest and medication, she'll be fine in a few days," the doctor said, putting the instruments back in his bag. "But may I ask, is she your niece?" Alexander hesitated for a moment. "It's a complicated situation, Doctor. I'm providing the necessary care." Dr. Henry nodded professionally. "I understand. Anything you need, I'm available." After the doctor left, Alexander remained by Emily's side, controlling the fever with medications and cold compresses. It was strange how his hands, accustomed to dealing only with documents and keyboards, now moved with instinctive care when touching the girl's forehead to check her temperature. Around 6 in the morning, Emily woke up. Her fever had gone down, but she was still weak. "Teddy was worried," she said, hugging the teddy bear, "but he said you took good care of me." "How do you feel?" asked Alexander. "Better. Thank you for staying here with me. Mum used to do that when I got sick." The mention of her mother brought a shadow to Emily's face, but she didn't cry. Alexander realized that Emily had developed an impressive emotional strength for someone so small. "Emily, can you tell me more about your mom? When was the last time you saw her?" Emily was silent for a moment, organizing her memories. 3 weeks ago. She said she was going to look for work and would be back before dark. But she didn't come back. I waited in our cardboard house, but it started raining hard. Then a man said I couldn't stay there and sent me away." Alexander felt anger growing in his chest. Anger at the mother who had abandoned a child, anger at the man who had expelled Emily, anger at a world that allowed such situations to happen. "And you've been on the street since then?" "Yes, but Teddy taught me to be brave. He said that sometimes good people take time to appear, but they always do." Over the next few days, a new routine began to form in Alexander's apartment. Emily remained in the improvised office, but gradually she began to occupy other spaces in the house. Alexander discovered that she liked to draw, so he bought paper and colored pencils. Emily spent hours creating comic stories where Teddy was the hero. The mornings became different. Alexander, accustomed to leaving early for the office, now got up earlier to prepare breakfast for Emily. His culinary skills were limited, but Emily didn't complain about the burnt pancakes or the hot chocolate that looked more like colored water. "You don't know how to cook," Emily noted one morning, looking at a pancake that resembled rubber. "No, I really don't," admitted Alexander. "Mom did. She made a carrot cake that was delicious. I can teach you." Alexander smiled. "You know how to make cake?" "I do. Mom taught me. She said every girl needs to know how to cook to take care of the people she loves." That's how Alexander found himself in the kitchen on a Saturday afternoon, following the instructions of a 6-year-old to make carrot cake. Emily commanded the operation with seriousness, guiding each step, tasting the batter and making corrections. The result was surprisingly good. "You learn fast," said Emily, licking the batter off her finger, "but you need more practice." Alexander laughed. It had been years since he had laughed so naturally. During the afternoons when Alexander worked at home, Emily stayed quiet in the corner of the living room, drawing or talking softly with Teddy. Sometimes Alexander caught her looking at him with curiosity, as if trying to decipher a puzzle. "Why do you work so much?" she asked on one of those afternoons. Alexander stopped typing and looked at her. "It's my job. I need to make money." "Why so much money?" The question caught him off guard. Why so much money? For years, the answer had been obvious: security, power, independence. But before Emily's curious eyes, these reasons seemed empty. "To have a good life," he finally answered. Emily looked around the luxurious apartment. "You already have a good life. You have this beautiful house, you have food, you have a warm bed. Why do you need more?" Alexander didn't know what to answer. In Emily's simplicity, there was a wisdom that bothered and fascinated him at the same time. The nights became Alexander's favorite time. Emily had developed the habit of asking him to tell stories before going to sleep. Alexander, who had never told a story to a child, initially resorted to the classics that he vaguely remembered from his own childhood. But soon, Emily began to make suggestions. "Tell the story of Teddy," she asked one night. "What story of Teddy?" "His true story, where he came from, why he's so wise." Alexander looked at the worn teddy bear in Emily's hands. "I don't know his true story." Then make one up. The best stories are made up. That's how Alexander discovered that he had an imagination he didn't know he possessed. Night after night, he created fantastic adventures for Teddy. The teddy bear traveled to magical kingdoms, helped other children, faced dragons made of sadness and fear. Emily listened to every word with attention, sometimes suggesting changes in the plot or new characters. "Teddy needs a friend," she said one night. "What kind of friend?" "A brave girl who isn't afraid of anything." Alexander smiled. "Like you." "Like me," confirmed Emily, smiling back. The stories began to be illustrated. Alexander, who hadn't drawn since childhood, discovered pleasure in creating characters on paper with Emily. They spent Sunday afternoons creating comic stories, Alexander drawing the scenery, while Emily created the characters and dialogues. But not everything was harmony. Alexander realized that Emily sometimes became melancholic, especially in the late afternoon, when the light began to diminish. In these moments, she hugged Teddy more tightly and stayed quiet, lost in thoughts he couldn't reach. "Are you thinking about your mum?" he asked on one of those occasions. Emily nodded. "Sometimes I dream that she comes back. She knocks on the door and apologizes for taking so long. Then the three of us stay together forever." "The three of us?" "You, me, and Mom. You could be my dad and Mom's husband." Alexander felt a tightness in his chest. Emily's innocence in imagining that life could be so simple touched him deeply, but it also worried him. He didn't know how to explain to a child that adult life was much more complicated than childish dreams. "Emily, sometimes people don't come back. That doesn't mean they don't love us, but sometimes they can't come back." "I know," said Emily, with a maturity too much for her age. "But it's nice to dream, isn't it?" Alexander hugged her, smelling the children's shampoo in her hair. "Yes, it's very nice to dream." It was on a Monday that the fragile peace they had built was shaken. Alexander was in the office when he received a call from Richard. "Mr. Mitchell, there's a woman here in the building saying she wants to talk to you about a child. The doorman doesn't want to let her up without authorization." Alexander felt his stomach contract. "What does she look like?" "Woman in her 30s, dark hair, very thin. She's quite agitated." Alexander closed his eyes. He instinctively knew who it was. "Send her up." 15 minutes later, a woman knocked at his door. Alexander immediately recognized Emily's eyes in the tired and marked face of the woman, who introduced herself as Helen, Emily's mother. "Where is my daughter?" asked Helen, trying to enter the apartment. Alexander discreetly blocked the passage. "Emily is fine, she's at school." "You have no right to keep her. She's my daughter." "Where have you been for the last 3 weeks?" asked Alexander, keeping his voice calm. Helen lowered her eyes. "I had problems, but now everything is resolved. I came to get my daughter." Alexander observed her carefully. Helen smelled of alcohol, despite it being the middle of the afternoon. Her clothes were dirty and wrinkled, and she had deep, dark circles under her eyes. "Emily told me you went looking for work and didn't come back." "And that's exactly what happened. I got a job in another city, but it took me time to save money for transportation back." Alexander didn't believe the story, but he knew he couldn't simply prevent Helen from seeing her daughter. Legally, he had no rights over Emily. Emily is well cared for here. She's going to school, has food, clean clothes, medical care. Are you sure you can offer that to her?" Helen became irritated. "Of course I can. I'm her mother. Who are you? Just some stranger who took advantage of the situation." "I didn't take advantage of anything. I found Emily abandoned on the street and helped her." "She wasn't abandoned. She was waiting for me to come back." The discussion was interrupted by the sound of a key in the lock. Emily had arrived from school. Alexander had hired a nanny, Mrs. Carmen, to pick her up and accompany her during the periods when he was working. Emily came running in, as she always did, ready to tell about her day at school. But she stopped abruptly upon seeing Helen. For a long moment, mother and daughter looked at each other in silence. Alexander observed Emily's reaction, trying to understand what was going through the girl's mind. "Mom?" Emily finally said, her voice carrying a mixture of joy and hurt that broke Alexander's heart. Helen knelt and opened her arms. "My daughter, Mom is back." But Emily didn't run into her mother's arms. She remained standing, holding Teddy tightly, her eyes going from Helen to Alexander. "You took a long time," said Emily, her voice small but firm. "I know, my daughter. Mom had problems, but now everything is fine. Let's go to our new home." Emily looked at Alexander with an expression he had never seen before. It was fear. Fear of leaving, fear of staying, fear of choosing. "I want to stay here," Emily finally said. The words echoed in the apartment like thunder. Helen turned pale. Alexander felt the world spin. "Emily, I'm your mother," said Helen, her voice breaking. "I know, but you left me alone." Alexander would never leave me alone. Alexander knelt beside Emily, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Emily, Helen is your mother. She loves you. Then why did she leave?" The simple question had no simple answer. Alexander looked at Helen, who began to cry silently. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," said Alexander softly, "but that doesn't mean they don't love their children." Emily looked at her mother, then at Alexander. "Can I talk to Teddy?" Alexander nodded. Emily stepped away a few paces and began to whisper with the teddy bear. Helen and Alexander remained silent, watching the girl make a decision that no child should have to make. When Emily returned, her eyes were decided. "Teddy says families can be different ways. I want both of you to be my family." Alexander felt his heart stop. Helen stopped crying and looked at her daughter with surprise. "Both of us?" asked Helen. Emily nodded. "Alexander took care of me when you weren't here. Now you're back. We can be a family, the three of us. Teddy says it's possible." Alexander looked at Helen, who was looking back at him with an indefinable expression. Neither of them knew what to say in the face of the revolutionary simplicity of Emily's proposal. But in that moment, Alexander realized that his life had changed forever. It was no longer just about saving an abandoned child. It was about discovering what family really meant. Emily's proposal created a tense silence in the apartment. Alexander observed Helen, trying to decipher her true intentions, while she looked at her daughter with a mixture of surprise and something he couldn't identify, perhaps relief. "Emily, my daughter," Helen finally said, her voice trembling. "Things don't work that way. I'm your mother. You come with me." "But I don't want to go, Mom. I'm happy here. Alexander teaches me stories. We bake cakes together, and I have a new school with nice friends." Alexander saw the pain in Helen's eyes and felt a pang of compassion. As much as he questioned her attitudes, he understood that seeing your own daughter prefer to stay with a stranger must be devastating. "Helen," said Alexander carefully, "why don't we talk calmly? Emily can play in the room while we talk." Helen hesitated but nodded. Emily hugged Teddy and went to the office, not without looking back with evident concern. When they were alone, Alexander served water to Helen and sat at the kitchen table, maintaining a respectful distance. "Where were you really these 3 weeks?" asked Alexander. Helen lowered her eyes. "It's none of your business." "It became my business the moment I found your daughter alone on the street, Helen. Emily deserves honesty." Helen remained silent for long minutes. Alexander waited, allowing her to process her own words. "I was trying to fix my life," she finally said. "I have problems I couldn't solve with Emily around." "What kind of problems?" Helen looked at him with defiance. "Why do you want to know? Are you planning to keep my daughter forever?" The question caught Alexander off guard. He hadn't thought in terms of forever. He had simply acted on instinct when he found Emily, and then each day had naturally flowed into the next. "I want what's best for Emily," he answered honestly, "and that includes a present and caring mother. You think I don't love my daughter. I think you do love her, but love without responsibility can be dangerous for a child." Helen began to cry again. "You don't understand. I lost my job, couldn't pay rent, had nowhere else to go. I thought if I could establish myself somewhere else, I could come back for her. I never imagined she would leave our little cardboard house." Alexander felt his anger dissolving, replaced by something resembling understanding. "And did you get established?" Helen shook her head. "It didn't work out. Nothing worked out. Now I have nothing. No job, no home, no money. I just want my daughter back." "To take her where?" Helen didn't answer. Alexander leaned forward. "Helen, I have a proposal. Would you like to hear it?" She looked at him with distrust but nodded. "You can stay here too, temporarily, until you get back on your feet. Emily needs her mother, but she also needs stability. We can try to make this work." Helen stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "You're suggesting I live here, in your house? I have a guest room. Emily would be happy to have both of you near, and you would have time to look for work, reorganize your life. Why would you do this? Alexander thought about the question. Because Emily taught me that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't need to make logical sense. Helen remained silent, processing the proposal. And what would you gain from this? The certainty that Emily is safe, and with the mother she loves. You don't know me. How do you know you can trust me? Alexander smiled sadly. I don't. But Emily trusts you, despite everything. That must mean something. After long minutes, Helen slowly nodded. All right, but only until I can manage on my own. When they told the decision to Emily, the girl jumped for joy, hugging first Alexander, then Helen, then Teddy. I knew Teddy was right. Now we're a real family. The first days were strange for everyone. Helen settled into the guest room, but moved around the house like an uncomfortable visitor. Alexander tried to maintain his work routine, but was constantly attentive to the dynamics between mother and daughter. Emily, in turn, seemed to be constantly divided between the joy of having her mother back and the fear that she would leave again. Alexander noticed that the girl was more clingy, asking him to check several times if Helen was still in the house when she returned from school. Alexander, Mom isn't going to leave again, is she? Emily asked one night when he was telling a Teddy story. I don't know, Emily. Only your mother can answer that. But you wouldn't let her go without me, right? Alexander felt the weight of the responsibility he had assumed. Emily, your mother loves you very much. If she decides to leave, it will be because she thinks it's best for you. But what if it's not better? What if I want to stay here with you? The question echoed in the silent room. Alexander had no answer he could give to a 6-year-old about the complexity of adult decisions. What does Teddy think? He finally asked. Emily whispered with the teddy bear for a moment. He says sometimes we have to be brave, even when we're scared, and that real families always find a way to stay together. Alexander kissed Emily's forehead. Teddy is very wise. Meanwhile, Helen struggled with her own demons. Alexander caught her several times looking at Emily with an expression of deep pain, as if she were seeing something she had lost and didn't know how to get back. She's changed so much, said Helen one afternoon when Emily was at school. Alexander, who was working on his laptop at the kitchen table, looked at her. How so? She's more independent, more confident. She talks differently, behaves differently. Is that bad? Helen shook her head. It's not bad. It's just different from the girl I left. Alexander closed the laptop. Helen, children grow up fast, especially when they go through difficult situations. It's just that sometimes I feel like she doesn't need me anymore. All children need their mother, but maybe Emily has learned that she can count on herself too. Helen remained silent, absorbing the words. Have you ever had children? She asked. Alexander hesitated. It was a question that hit him in a deep place he preferred to keep closed. Once, a long time ago. What happened? It didn't work out, replied Alexander, ending the subject. But Helen had touched a wound that Alexander thought had healed. That night, after Emily and Helen went to sleep, he found himself thinking about Marina, the woman he had briefly lived with years ago, and the baby they had lost before it was even born. The pain had been so intense that Alexander had sworn never to allow himself that kind of vulnerability again. Now watching Emily sleep with Teddy in her arms, he wondered if he had spent all these years running from something that could have been the best part of his life. It was in the second week of cohabitation that the first major conflict arose. Alexander came home and found Emily crying in the corner of the living room, hugging Teddy. What happened? He asked, kneeling beside her. Mum left and didn't say when she'd be back, sobbed Emily. Alexander felt anger rise in his chest. Where did she go? I don't know. She got a phone call and got very nervous. She said she needed to resolve something important and rushed out. Alexander checked the time. Helen had been gone for 3 hours. He tried to call her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Emily, do you remember exactly what your mother said? She said it was about work, but she looked scared just like that time before she went away. Alexander felt a chill in his stomach. He carried Emily in his arms and took her to the kitchen, preparing a snack while trying to think what to do. Alexander, Mom isn't going to leave me again, is she? I don't know, dear, but I'm here no matter what happens. Emily nestled against him. Teddy said you never abandoned me, is that true? Alexander looked into the trusting eyes of the girl and felt something move definitively in his chest. It's true, Emily. I will never abandon you." Helen returned only the next morning with wrinkled clothes and red eyes. She found Alexander preparing breakfast for Emily, who was wearing her school uniform. "Where were you?" asked Alexander, keeping his voice low so as not to frighten Emily. "I had to resolve some things," Helen answered evasively. Emily ran to hug her mother. "Mom, I thought you had gone away again." Helen hugged her daughter, but Alexander noticed that she avoided his gaze. "Mom isn't going to leave without telling again, is she?" insisted Emily. "No, my daughter, Mom will tell you." But Alexander knew that Helen was lying. There was something in her behavior that indicated bigger problems than she was willing to admit. That afternoon, after Emily went to school, Alexander confronted Helen. "Helen, I can't allow Emily to go through the anxiety of being abandoned again. If you have problems that you can't resolve while being here, maybe it's better to be honest about it." Helen looked at him with desperation. "It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me. How can I help if I don't know what the problem is?" Helen took a deep breath. "I owe money to dangerous people. They found me. They want me to pay or what? Or they'll go after Emily." Alexander felt his blood freeze in his veins. What kind of people? How much money? $15,000. I borrowed when I was desperate before leaving Emily. I thought I could pay back quickly, but... Helen, why didn't you tell me this before? Because it's my problem. I didn't want to involve you. Alexander stood up and began to pace the room. "I'm already involved. Emily is involved. $15,000? I know it's a lot of money. Helen, $15,000 is nothing compared to Emily's safety. I'll pay this debt." Helen looked at him with surprise. "You would do that?" "I would do anything to protect Emily. But I need your word that you won't get into more problems of this kind." Helen began to cry. "I didn't want things to be this way. I just wanted to be a good mother to my daughter." Alexander approached and put his hand on her shoulder. "Helen, being a good mother sometimes means asking for help when we need it. Let me help you both." "Why are you doing this? Why are you willing to do so much for a child who isn't even your daughter?" Alexander looked out the window, seeing children playing in the park across from the building. "Because Emily taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to stay, choosing to care, choosing to love, and I chose Emily." Helen wiped away her tears. "And me? Where do I fit in this invented family?" Alexander smiled for the first time in that conversation. "You remain as Emily's mother, and maybe with time we'll discover what kind of family we really are." That night, when Emily returned from school, she found Alexander and Helen talking calmly in the kitchen, planning how to resolve Helen's financial situation and how to establish clear rules for living together. "You're not fighting?" asked Emily, relieved. "No, little one," replied Alexander. "We're learning to be a family, and families talk about problems to solve them together." Emily smiled and hugged Teddy. "Teddy said he knew you would be friends. He always knows these things." Alexander and Helen exchanged a look, and for the first time smiled at each other. Maybe Teddy really did know some important things about family. 3 months later, life in Alexander's house had found its own rhythm. Helen had secured a job at a flower shop near the neighborhood, work that made her genuinely smile for the first time since Alexander had met her. Emily thrived at school, bringing home drawings and stories that she divided equally between Alexander and Helen. The mornings followed an established ritual. Alexander prepared coffee while Helen combed Emily's hair for school. The afternoons were for Emily and Alexander doing homework together, while Helen prepared dinner, gradually discovering culinary talents she had forgotten she possessed. But it was on a Saturday afternoon that everything changed again. Alexander was in the living room, working on some reports when he heard the doorbell ring insistently. Helen went to answer and returned pale, accompanied by an elegant woman of about 50. "Alexander," said Helen, her voice trembling. "This is Megan, my sister." Alexander stood up, extending his hand cordially, but the woman completely ignored him. Her eyes searched the room until finding Emily, who was playing on the carpet with Teddy. "Emily!" "My child, how I missed you." Emily looked at the woman without recognition. "Who are you?" Megan knelt in front of Emily, her eyes watering. "I'm your Aunt Megan, your mother's sister. I've come to take you to live with me." The silence that followed was broken by Emily's firm voice. "I don't want to leave, I live here." Alexander felt the world spin. He looked at Helen, who avoided his gaze, clearly knowing more about that situation than she had revealed. "Helen," said Alexander carefully, "can we talk in private?" "There's nothing to talk about," interrupted Megan, standing up. "I am Emily's blood family. I have more right to her than both of you put together." "Aunt Megan," said Helen timidly, "Emily is fine here. She's in school, has medical care, is happy. Is happy living with a stranger while her mother lives on charity? Helen, have you completely lost your mind?" Alexander stepped forward. "Ms. Megan, I understand your concern, but Emily is not an object to be disputed. She has feelings, preferences, and she is a minor," cut off Megan. "Her preferences have no legal value." Emily, who had followed the discussion in silence, hugged Teddy tightly and stood up. "Teddy wants to talk to you." Everyone looked at the girl, surprised by the interruption. "What does Teddy want to say, dear?" asked Alexander, kneeling to Emily's height. Emily whispered with the teddy bear for a moment, then looked at the adults with seriousness. "Teddy says families aren't made by shouting. Families are made with love and care every day." Megan sighed impatiently. "Emily, you are too small to understand these things. I have an adequate home for you, with a room of your own, toys, pretty clothes." "I already have that here," replied Emily simply. "But here you're living a lie. This man is not your father. Your mother is not his wife. You're playing family." Megan's words hit Alexander like slaps. There was truth in them that he didn't want to recognize. Really, what were they? An improvised family, without legal ties, without guarantees for the future. Emily looked at Alexander, then at Helen, then at Megan. "Aunt Megan, where were you when I was on the street?" The question caught Megan off guard. "I didn't know you were on the street. Helen told me you were well cared for." Emily turned to Helen. "Mom, did you lie to Aunt Megan?" Helen lowered her eyes, ashamed. "I didn't want to worry her. I thought I could solve everything on my own." "And did you lie to Alexander too about not having family?" Alexander looked at Helen with surprise. This information changed many things. "Emily," said Helen, her voice breaking, "I didn't exactly lie. Megan and I had been fighting for years. I didn't think she would care." Megan approached her sister. "Helen, of course I care. You're my sister. Emily is my niece. When I found out about the situation, I came immediately." Emily absorbed all this information with the seriousness of an adult. Then she addressed Megan. "Aunt Megan, do you have children?" "No, dear, I never married, never had children, but I always wanted to take care of you." "And do you know how to make carrot cake?" Megan smiled. "Yes, I do. Your grandmother taught me the same recipe she taught your mother." Emily nodded, processing the information. "And do you know how to tell stories?" "I'd love to learn the stories you like." Alexander watched the conversation with a heavy heart. He could see that Megan genuinely loved Emily, and that she had much more to offer in terms of family stability than he could provide. "Emily," said Alexander softly, "your Aunt Megan seems to be a very good person, and she is your real family." Emily looked at him with teary eyes. "Alexander, don't you want me anymore?" The question was like a punch to the stomach. Alexander knelt and held Emily's small hands. "Emily, I love you more than anything in the world, but love sometimes means doing what's best for the person we love, even when it hurts us. And what's best for me?" Alexander looked at Helen, then at Megan. "Being with your true family, with people who can give you a permanent, stable home." Emily remained silent for long minutes. All the adults waited for her response, the air tense with expectation. "Can I ask a question to each of you?" All nodded. Emily addressed Helen first. "Mom, if you go to live with Aunt Megan, will you take good care of me? Won't you disappear again?" Helen knelt beside her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "My daughter, I solemnly promise that I will never leave you again. I learned that being a mother means staying, even when it's difficult." Emily nodded and turned to Megan. "Aunt Megan, if I go to live with you, can Alexander visit? Can he continue telling Teddy's stories?" Megan looked at Alexander with a softened expression. "Of course he can, dear. Alexander did something wonderful for you. He will always be welcome in our home." Finally, Emily turned to Alexander. "Alexander, if I go away, will you miss me?" Alexander felt tears burn his eyes. "I will miss you every day of my life, Emily, but I will be the happiest man in the world knowing that you are safe and loved." Emily hugged Teddy and whispered at length with him. When she raised her head, her eyes were decided. "I want to try living with Aunt Megan and Mom, but with one condition." "What condition, dear?" asked Megan. "Alexander comes to dinner with us every Sunday, and he continues being my heart dad." Alexander felt his chest explode with emotion. "Emily, Teddy said that heart families are as important as blood families, and that we can have both kinds." Megan approached Alexander, extending her hand. "Alexander, I don't know how to thank you for what you did for Emily, for my family. It would be an honor to have you as part of our life." Alexander shook Megan's hand, unable to speak. "Then it's decided," said Emily, jumping with joy. "We're going to be a big family, with Mom, Aunt Megan, Alexander, and Teddy." In the following days, the transition was carefully prepared. Megan had a spacious house in a quiet neighborhood, with a yard where Emily could play. Helen would be the primary caregiver, but would have her sister's support to completely re-establish herself. Alexander helped pack Emily's things, including all the drawings they had made together and the Teddy stories they had written. "Alexander," said Emily on the last night in the apartment, "can you write Teddy's stories in a real book?" "Why, dear?" "Because then other children who are alone can read them and know that there's always someone waiting to love them." Alexander smiled through tears. "That's a wonderful idea, Emily." On the following Sunday, Alexander arrived at Megan's house with a heavy heart and at the same time full of expectation. Emily received him at the door, running into his arms as she always did. "Alexander, look!" Emily pulled him by the hand to the backyard, where there was a playhouse that Megan had built. "Yes, just like the houses in Teddy's stories." During dinner, Alexander observed the new family dynamic. Helen was more relaxed, more present. Megan treated Emily with genuine affection, but also respected the special bond that existed between Alexander and the girl. "Alexander," said Megan while they had coffee, "Helen told me about your idea of writing a book with Emily's stories. I would like to finance the publication." Alexander looked surprised. "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is," interrupted Emily. "Teddy's stories need to fly to the whole world." 6 months later, The Adventures of Teddy, Stories of Courage and Love, was launched in a small bookstore in the neighborhood. Emily was radiant, wearing a new dress that Megan had bought for the occasion. Helen held her daughter's hand, proud. Alexander signed copies for the children present, but his gaze always returned to Emily. "Alexander," said Emily when the autograph session ended, "Teddy wants to tell you a secret." "What secret?" Emily whispered in his ear. "Teddy says you learned the most important thing in the world." "And what is that?" "That true love doesn't hold back. True love sets free. And when we free someone with love, that someone always comes back." Alexander hugged Emily, feeling the deep truth of the girl's words. She was right. By freeing Emily to live with her true family, he had gained something much greater: the certainty that love, when genuine, creates bonds that neither distance nor time can break. That night, when he returned to his apartment, Alexander didn't feel the loneliness he had feared. He felt fullness. The walls no longer echoed with emptiness, but with Emily's laughter, with the stories they had created together, with the certainty that there was a family waiting for him every Sunday. On the nightstand beside the bed, there was a photo of Emily holding Teddy and smiling at the camera. Next to the photo, a note written in the careful handwriting of a 6-year-old. "To Alexander, my heart dad. Thank you for teaching me that families are made with love. I love you forever. Emily and Teddy." Alexander smiled, turned off the light, and fell asleep with the certainty that he had lived the greatest adventure of his life, and that this adventure was just beginning. 2 years later, Alexander received a special invitation from Emily. She had written a new Teddy story about a stone giant who learned to love and who helped a family find each other again. She wanted him to illustrate the story and be the godfather of the launch. The invitation ended with a phrase that summarized everything they had lived through together. "Teddy said that some people enter our lives to stay forever. Even when they're not near every day, you are one of those people, Alexander. Thank you for teaching me that love multiplies when we share it." The end. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Alexander and Emily has touched you deeply. This narrative about unconditional love, chosen family, and the courage to do what is right, even when it hurts, is just one of the many exciting stories we have prepared for you. If this story awakened emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to receive more stories that explore the complexity and beauty of human relationships. Click the like button if Emily and Alexander won your hearts, and share in the comments how this story made you reflect on the true meaning of family. Every day we bring unique narratives that celebrate the strength of love in its most diverse forms. Don't miss our upcoming content. Each story is an emotional journey that promises to touch your soul. We look forward to reading your comments and knowing how these stories impact your lives. Until the next heart adventure.